Hey everybody, welcome to Analysis Paralysis, Doing More with Less. I am Clay Drye. I'm an engineer here at Everfox, and I've been in the insider risk community for over 20 years, the IC, DoD industry, and I've worked across many programs that kind of help, build insider risk programs, and I've built a couple of monitoring and analysis programs from scratch. Um, Next month is National Insider Threat Awareness Month, so leading into that, we thought it'd be a good time to have a session regarding, kind of analytics and building analysis efforts and building those programs and strategies for overcoming maybe some of the problems you might come across. I'm joined here by John Besko.
Hey there, Clay. It's great to be here with you today. I'm John Besko, Program Director with GDIT. I've been with the company for about 15 years now, all the while supporting insider threat, counterintelligence, security programs. Prior to that, active duty Air Force for about a decade, where I mostly worked on digital forensics and InfoSec.
Great, and again, appreciate so much you taking the time to join me today. I know to get right into it. I know when again, 15, 20 years ago, when everybody was starting out on this thing, there was a large tendency to build these things out of network defense efforts. And it felt like a lot of times it fell in the kind of IT realm and, leverage traditional kind of cybersecurity techniques. And we started to kind of realize that wasn't, quite going to work. Can you kind of speak about bringing the more human element?
Yeah, absolutely, Clay. So that is one of just the initial kind of paralysis functions that you might get when looking at a program from the insider threat side or the cybersecurity side. Both of those two areas, distinct, separate disciplines, they can work together really well. They complement each other, but it really is important to understand the nuance. On the insider threat, insider risk side, you're really looking at the human being behind the keyboard. What's going on in that person's life that's leading to some of that risk that's coming into your organization? How is that being exemplified on the system through some of the concerning behaviors you might be able to detect? And at the end of the day, you're taking action on a trusted employee who is working for you, been brought in to do great things. Whereas on the cybersecurity side, you're really kind of a little more focused on the ones and zeros. Maybe it's just activity an account on a system, how data might be moved from account to account. And again, there's some overlap there, but there really is a difference on how you respond to things, how you analyze things. So it is important to understand that little nuance as you're building an insider risk program.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, early on trying to do, use those traditional cybersecurity sources and, everything's like I identified by IP and things like that. And it's really hard to tie that back to an identity. And, I used to actually joke, I remember early on that like, using all those kind of network sources to try to do insider risk is a little bit like, it's a little bit like measuring a sun by looking at its effect on all the planets, right? You kind of you get an idea of what's going on with the sun, but you're really missing the star of the show, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. And there's just so many data sources out there, whether you're building a program from scratch or maybe you have a program with some basic capabilities and you want to take it to the next level, whether it's program leadership or some senior analysts that are looking for new ways to collect data from different sources, you can hit a roadblock and kind of again have that paralysis come in of where do I go next? And kind of as a callback to that cybersecurity versus insider threat, there's some cyber focused tools out there that supply an awful lot of great insider risk type of information, like a user activity monitoring tool that an insider risk program can control inherently within the program. But there's also a lot of disparate data sources, as we like to call them out there. And those are data sources that have existed within the organization probably forever for a long period of time that can also inform your insider risk program, provide a lot of great context on what's going on. Some examples there could be elements from your organization's HR system. It could be badge records. Where are people going around their facility? Phone records in terms of fact of this number called that number for this period of time. It could be company credit card usage throughout the organization. All those elements, they don't necessarily exist in the first place to feed an insider threat program. So there's some data challenges there. It exists in different places throughout the organization. It's not normalized and attributed as you touched on before, so that's going to be a challenge of your program. And then you're never going to be finished collecting all the data per se. Even the most sophisticated programs out there, there's always another element that you can add. So it's really goes back to what's the best path for your organization between resources, technical capabilities, legal authorities. Those are all really important things to consider as you're building out, maturing your program.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, again, to your point, as we kind of expand to realize this is a larger human problem, then we are talking about more data sources. And I know, again, in your efforts, you've dealt with this. Can you talk about some of the technical challenges of just kind of syncing those up and bringing them into one place?
Absolutely. And definitely, I will get to the technical challenges in a moment. Important to riff off the idea that there's some legal hurdles up front. And a
Oh,
lot of
right.
times, while, yeah, there's some technical challenges, which are plenty, it's really important to get to your general counsel, your attorneys within your organization. And this is whether you're a big government organization, a company anywhere, whether that's in the industrial base or private industry, all really important to get in front of that counsel. Make sure you have the authorities to collect certain data sources, being able to do certain analysis of those data sources, make sure the organization's covered from signing user agreements, having the right login banners. That's an awful lot of work before you even start looking at the data sources. But then once you get to that point, it is important to make sure there's good attribution back to those employees. Meaning that, again, it's a human problem that we're facing here. And if you can't determine that an alert from this particular data source directly ties back to this particular employee who's sitting in this organization, assigned to this location, you need to do all of those things up front. So these are some of the kind of boring building block sets as you bring that data in. Everybody wants to talk about AI and throwing that at the problem, and I'm sure we'll touch on a little AI as we go, but it's really important to have some of these basic building blocks in place before you start to do some of the more advanced elements of an insider risk program.
Absolutely. And you talk about legal buyout and stuff like that. There's a lot of stakeholders, as we know that, and it's amazing, particularly in government, but in industry as well, where you can get one group that can kind of say, wait a second, I'm not sure that's okay from a privacy standpoint, or I'm not sure that's okay from a legal standpoint or an ethical like so many groups that to your point, like you really have to have those conversations ahead of time so that everybody, it's like one of those things where everybody knows what the answer is going to be by the time it gets there, right? Like, so that by the
Absolutely.
time you're actually asking for permission for the thing you want to do, everybody's already knows it's going to happen. So that engagement is crucial.
Most certainly. And there's definitely some things you can do as you're having these conversations to defend your program per se and show that you've thought through all of these things. Obviously, I spoke about the login banners and user agreements, but even internal to your program, we certainly recommend to our customers have some sort of separate enclave, whether it's a literal physically separated system, that's ideal. But even if it's just something like a VLAN off of your corporate network where only your insider threat program personnel are allowed to access it with some extra defense in depth layers surrounding that data. At the end of the day, as you're collecting all these sources that we're touching on, you're going to have one of the biggest collections of PII from your own organization sitting in one place. And you want to make sure that's protected, both from outside adversaries, competitors, hackers coming in and maybe stealing that data, but also for the integrity of your employees themselves. These are good people by and large who are brought in to do good things, and obviously their information deserves to be protected to the highest levels. And that's a really important pillar for your program to be able to demonstrate that, whether it's to a legal component or your CTO shop, whatever the case may be, you really want to protect that PII.
Right, absolutely. And even show that you have a plan, right? Like, hey, this is what we're going to actually do with it. Like to your point, not only how we're going to protect it from those external sources, but we've mentioned in the past, watch the watchers, right? Making sure you can kind of prove and show what are the process, having those processes ahead of time. What if you end up with an investigation on a manager you know, in the insider threat program, right? What if the guy building, building the thing is the bad guy, and planning for that ahead of time and showing that you've planned for that. And I think that leads to another point, which is, I've seen a lot of programs where it feels like you've got little pockets of people who say they do insider threat. Oh, we're looking for people doing this bad thing. We're looking for this people doing this bad thing over here in those pockets, and coming back to those data sources. That effort all needs to be, centralized into one entity who's responsible for actually monitoring for the insider risk and the concerns, rather than these pockets of people who are all just kind of going rogue.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a challenge for any medium to large scale organization in this remote day and age that we're living in. You've got maybe people working from home, or even if they're in offices, they could be all over the world. And it's a really hard problem. So just collecting, centralizing all of this data, to your point, gives you the most chance of success. And as you're navigating all of these challenges and getting the approvals for more data sources, one of the things that we've found that really works, and as far as a general approach goes, is target behaviors across an organization. You're not singling out a person for any bad reason. You're not collecting disproportionately on a certain person. Your overall approach should be collect all the same data on everyone. And once you start implementing some advanced analytics tools, ensure they're looking at the behaviors. So no one's singled out. And then, of course, once you get to a point where you find some of those concerning behaviors and you open up a case or do some focused observation on someone, of course, that's going to be documented in your case management system. You show that you have good predicate, good reason to look at that person. And then you're covered from a legal standpoint, and you've got a defendable, repeatable approach on how to identify that risk and take action accordingly.
Absolutely. You don't want to, you don't want to look like I used to always tell people, like, hey, we need to think about, what about 2 years from now? What about, hey, we fired someone, or we took some administrative action, and they took offense and they sued us, be it again, a government, a company, whatever. What's going to happen 2 years from now when we're sitting in front of a jury, and they're looking through line by line, what did you do to find this bad behavior? And if it was, well, I did this, and then I said that looks bad, well, that's not good, because then, okay, they can say, well, maybe you just didn't like my client. And so we have to
Absolutely.
worry about being able to prove that we got to it through a reasonable, ethical way.
Great point. And again, important to remember with that human aspect, probably 99% of the folks in your organization are good people that are doing good things. So we don't want to target people. We don't want to get people in trouble for the wrong reason, or because we didn't look at all of the data. So centralizing all of that data, to your point, following that repeatable process, it ensures you're only identifying the bad actors that are within your organization, and then you've got that good legal standing behind you to take any further action.
Yeah. I think that kind of touches on a little bit the difference between insider threat, which we've talked a little, and we've talked about insider risk a bit. And I do like to dig in with people on, the differences between, um, you know, uh, what an insider threat is versus the larger context of insider risk. Care to speak on the difference there?
Yeah, that's a great topic, and we're seeing that debate kind of emerge over the last few years. So, from kind of a nomenclature perspective, there might be a little bit of a paralysis in how program leadership is kind of coining the term for our programs here. It started off as insider threat, of course. That's in the executive orders. That's what programs were called. But as we're kind of touching on in our last little topic, there is not everyone is threatening to the environment. In fact, the vast majority of folks in your organization are not doing that. So it does have a little bit more of a negative connotation than it probably needs to. So we're starting to see a little bit more of the shift in terminology and softening up insider threat a bit into more of an insider risk framework, with the nuance being, while we may not all be threats, in reality, we are all presenting some sort of risk to the organization. And that doesn't mean that, someone's going to open up a case on us, or we're going to be in trouble or anything like that. But the reality is we're all humans. We all have certain predispositions and stressors that are going on. We all make mistakes here or there, have a bad day. So it's important for insider risk programs to take account of all of that risk that's out there, weigh that accordingly, and act on it, rather than having that persona that this is a program that is looking at everybody as if there's a threat and we're out to get them, because that is absolutely not the case.
Right. Absolutely. And you know, to your point, right? Like sometimes an issue happens, maybe you've got stressors, whatever, maybe you've had a bad day, you yelled at someone that maybe you shouldn't have, and but maybe the counseling, maybe getting help, maybe taking some more training kind of helps to turn that person around rather than waiting for them to turn into a larger problem. Which kind of brings us to talking about the critical pathway, right? I know you've done some work on the critical pathway for insider risk and using that to try to help get ahead of issues. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I'd love to. At GDIT, we are big partners with Dr. Eric Shaw and his trademarked critical pathway to insider risk. He has just really set this model, which we use as our underlying foundation for the whole approach that we're talking about here today. And really, it's a psychosocial model that takes into account various elements of what makes a person tick, per se. And those are things like personal predispositions. Those can be issues that someone has going on, whether they're medical, psychological, maybe some financial issues, those sorts of things, and mix that in with some stressors, which could be, some challenges going on at home. Maybe you've got some teenage kids that are driving you crazy. Maybe you've got some marital issues. Maybe you don't get along well with your boss. Maybe you're working a lot of hours on challenging projects. Again, not inherently bad things. These are all things that we're all dealing with at one point in our career or another. But the more of those things that you have, the more, things can start to bubble up a little bit. So it's great on that critical pathway model to have a little bit of insight into those kind of traits and states, if you will. And you're not going to get all the information on all of them, but the more little things you can come across through your data collection, the more it can inform the risk of someone. And then really, as you fast forward on through of that person within the organization, they start to depict or display some concerning behaviors at some point sometimes. And when there's a whole lot of stressors behind the scenes, and then all of a sudden some concerning behaviors that are giving you pause and maybe starting to break some rules or doing something well outside of the norm for that individual, then all of a sudden there could be a problem. The risk profile is heightened for that person. And usually that's a good point in time for the organization to take some action. And ideally, the organization wants to mitigate those problems as early as possible, but sometimes we see the supervisor doesn't handle everything as well as they probably could have. Maybe HR isn't really engaged like they might be somewhere else. So all of those things leading together, the organization puts the squeeze on someone, and then there could be some sort of insider threat incident. And, at the most severe case, that could be something like espionage or stealing of intellectual property, but it could just be some serious security violations. It could be someone who's now presenting a workplace violence risk or even showing some suicidal ideations throughout the organization. So the critical pathway allows us to, in a scientific manner, assess that risk as soon as we reasonably can, get left of boom, left of bang, as we like to say, identify that risk early on so we can take some positive action through the organization more quickly, hopefully get someone off that bad pathway so they're not getting to a point where they're doing something bad. So we're truly trying to protect our people, protect the organization, but get people, keep them employed, keep them doing good things, not really out to get them per se.
Yeah, you've invested a lot of time and resources into, these people, right? And you want to continue to, not to frame it this way, but right, we put time and effort into people. We care about the people, like, um, eh, and you want to continue to have them be a productive member of your, of your organization, right? And back to actually to pick at one of the points you just made, you said, hey, maybe the manager handled that in a way that could have been done a little better, right? That's part of it too, making sure that we have proportional responses just from, top down, bottom up, the not just the way the insider program reacts to things, insider risk or legal or whatever, but making sure that managers know how to manage and make sure that you're keeping the employees happy and that you're not, you know, say, I've been in efforts where we'll see a behavior happen and you'll have, an analyst say, we've got to go, like, what are we doing? We've got to call and have them walked out. And you're like, well, wait a second. Did you look at the rest of the organization? Turns out that was just the one we saw, and they're all doing it. And it turns out it's just a training issue that they all thought something was okay, and it's not okay. But their leadership needs to be made aware that this is happening, and they can come in and just course correct and then make sure everybody's okay after that. And if someone keeps doing it, well, now you can, get upset about it, take action about it or whatever, right?
Absolutely. That's a great lead in, especially with National Insider Threat Awareness Month right around the corner here in September. Training awareness outreach, a really big component of a successful insider risk program. Certainly for the general public, general user base, employees throughout. But it's also helps to do a little extra training and some attention to your HR professionals, your first line supervisors. In many cases, those supervisors who are interfacing with employees every day, they're your force multipliers, your sensors out there, and you can have all the great user activity monitoring tools, which you should absolutely have, but they really can work in concert with those supervisors who are going to tip you off early on. And again, not in a sense of they're ratting people out. It's no, they're letting the program know who program has a lot more information in a lot of cases and can maybe intervene if needed in a positive way to help that employee out. And as you said, get better return on that investment that you're putting into the employment of the employees within your organization.
Yeah, and it does go both ways, right? So not only are they helping you know more about that whole person concept, but it's you use them as resources as well in the insider risk program to say, hey, we see this weird thing. Is that expected? Oh yeah, and this is why. Oh, okay, great. Then we'll just move on. We don't need to worry about that. I do feel like one of the analysis paralysis issues a lot of people probably have is even with the framework, right? Critical pathway is what to focus on. And I will say there are, and yes, they're government focused, but there are some guides out there that are kind of helpful in that realm, like the Security Executive Agent Directive 3, for example, the adjudicative criteria for holding a top secret clearance and any folks out there in the industry may say, well, wait a second, those don't apply to me. And yes, some of those, like, they will talk about foreign travel, things like that. A lot of industry can't collect that information, but what they can do is note if they're talking about it on a work resource, perhaps, right? But it just gives you a feel and helps you to start to understand what kinds of behaviors the critical pathway can help with that. These resources can help with that to just understand, well, what kinds of things should we be worried about?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And really kind of a core general data source that helps you get there in a lot of cases. Anything that has authored text directly coming from an employee. And that can be things that your user activity monitoring is picking up via chats, email, maybe, social media posts they're making from one of your company machines, that sort of thing. That we find is a treasure trove of data of showing kind of how people really feel, what's going on, what kind of actions are they taking, and being able to collect all of that, triage it, look at it. It's a daunting task, but really, if I could guide folks and recommend one kind of source of data, it would be that authored text.
Absolutely. So you talk about the trove of information and the kind of large this sounds like a big problem, right? We're looking through a lot of large data. So this kind of brings us to the issue of scaling. And I know a lot of folks, there, there's a diminishing return on investment on hiring more analysts. And at the end of the day, it can be tempting to say, well, we've doubled what we're looking at. So we brought in more data sources. We need another analyst. We need another analyst. So at some point, these efforts have to scale, and you can't have an analyst per employee, right? It's just not gonna it's not gonna work. So I know you've dealt some with taking kind of a medium system and making it a large system, or then taking a large system, bringing in more data, and figuring out how can we scale this to still be effective while kind of dealing with large amounts of data. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. And in fact, some of the the early building blocks that we started talking about early in our conversation are really applicable here as you start to get to a point where you're scaling out. It's pivotal to have all of that information collected in a centralized location, all attributed out to those individual employees, and comparing the data sources together so you can readily bring up a dashboard view and have numerous streams of data coming in to look at those individuals. And to your point earlier, if there's different pockets of insider threat capabilities throughout an organization, it makes it really hard to scale. So as you get all of that centralized data, you're collecting lots of user activity monitoring, bumping it against all of those other disparate data sources, then you can really apply some advanced analytics tools. And there's no one tool that's a silver bullet to rule them all. And again, different programs being built differently with some different data. There's not one stop shop that you could just, kind of push the button and find the bad guy. However, we're seeing a lot of big data analysis tools over the last several years, whether that is a visualization tool to be able to look at large amounts of data, have analysts look for anomalies. We've been working together and have partnered on a psycholinguistic analysis tool that is able to, at scale, at an enterprise level, be able to distill down concerning communications that matter, look for signs of anger, disgruntlement, employees doing something way outside of the norms that they should be doing because they're in a heightened state of stress. Between Everfox, GDIT, we've got those capabilities. We've successfully implemented in customers, and that helps you, one, knowing that you can collect an awful lot of data, but then accurately triage it on down to that relatively small team of analysts that you might have. So their eyes are focused on really actionable things that have value and have meaning to your insider risk program. And again, those algorithms are there also in partnership with Dr. Shaw, that they're scientifically proven to identify, some level of risk when you see them throughout your organization.
Right, and to your point, highlight those ones that are worth looking at rather than the more traditional, again, the 15-year ago, okay, we're going to start going line by line through triggers, and instead saying, well, we need to bubble up triggers that are more indicators of actual bad behavior via these mechanisms. And again, do more with less. Have your analysts focus on real issues versus, just, hey, going through all the false positives and they help, to get rid of those. um, so,
Like,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say our analyst time, very precious. And in organizations that we support, we might be collecting terabytes of data every single day. And it's impossible, even for a large team, to look at that, let alone somewhere where you might only have a dozen analysts or so. So having a team of data scientists, advanced analytics, maybe some AI capabilities, and it really makes those analysts much more effective and efficient.
Yeah. And so, kind of, I guess, what's next, right? Where do we go from here? Like, what are we going to start seeing helping us? Well, hopefully we can, build build better, models, work with, the critical pathway. What are we doing? Maybe AI, like you said. Like, where do we go from here, right?
Sure. So it's really hard not to answer that question and not say AI is going to help us there. And I realize that's all the buzz and everybody's throwing AI at every problem, but I can certainly say from a practical standpoint, we've already got some things in production with some of our customers where we're using some AI best practices that are out there with our understanding of the insider risk problem, and throwing some things like large language models and distilling down lots of information and spitting out some results to analysts to call back to, making sure they're as efficient as they can be. But a really important thing to note in there, while AI can be another force multiplier for you, help you triage that data, you still need to have a human in the loop. It's really important. We are never in a place where we are allowing AI to make a decision for us, certainly not a decision that's going to directly affect someone's career. So we don't have some sort of analytic in place that says, hey, once this happens, send an email to this employee and they're going to go to HR and get fired. Like, obviously, extreme example. But it's really important, you're using the AI as a tipping and queuing type of feature, and then it focuses your analyst eyes, and they can really dig in to the raw data, ensure the context is correct, validate the results, because we don't want some hallucinated model leading to a problematic response from the organization. But in practice, we've seen that AI is really helping us get more proactive. We're training some models that are bumping up against all of those critical pathway best practices and things to look for across all those predispositions, concerning behaviors and stressors, and we're getting some great results. And then we're also using AI to help sum up some of our narrative reports. Of course, analysts have to type those up, get them to decision makers. And when you've got a really repeatable report format with the same types of data, it's really a great stage to train some models and help you kick out some automated recommended language that would be incorporated in a report. And again, of course, analysts review that for accuracy before it goes up. But if you've got an in-depth case and you're writing a 10, 12 page report on someone, just being able to use AI helps you get the right information into that narrative more quickly and get it into the decision maker's hands.
Yeah, yeah, I would have killed for that as an analyst back in the day, right? Like, having to go through the data and just say, okay, I need to summarize what happened. Wait, what time did that happen? Okay, that was who'd they say that to? Like, just having to go through and put all that together, like being able to use something like AI, and yeah, it might occasionally miss a thing, or like make sure, like you said, the human in the loop. But man, helping to take away a lot of the effort to the summarization there would be phenomenal. I will say, to add on, I I think it's important too to remember, like, AI is good. Every tool is good at what it's good at, right? AI is good at what it's good at, and there's always a concern that sometimes the insider risk, the insider threat you're really worried about, some of the most damaging could be the person who is just doing things within their normal day-to-day behavior that might not bubble up. So definitely, it's important, I think, to keep strategies for how do we continue to grow and find things that maybe aren't falling within there, right? I guess in the end, with any tool you use, don't become complacent. Make sure you're, always trying to grow and learn, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always going to be new tools, but there's always going to be new techniques from our adversaries who are trying to defeat those or work around. So it's a little bit of an arms race there. So you always want to look at those new technologies, vet them out, and then integrate them into your environment, and then continually training your environment. Like I said, with that the training and awareness program. Keep your basic rank and file employees aware of those basic things to look for, your supervision, your security components, your HR. This is really an enterprise type of capability for an insider risk program. And you might be an insider risk professional who's sitting on a program and you live and breathe insider risk, insider threat all day, every day, but you need to partner with all of those elements that we're touching on in order to have a successful program to protect your whole organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, I appreciate you joining me. That's pretty much it, everybody. Thanks so much, everybody who joined and stuck with us. I hope you found something interesting and informative in there. Uh, Keep your eye out. Next week we have Dan Velez actually talking to Dr. Eric Shaw about understanding the critical pathway to insider risk.
That's great. I highly recommend tuning in for that. You'll get a lot of great info, further details on that critical pathway from Dr. Eric Shaw. And actually, sometime the end of September or early October, I had a chat with Dan Velez that's recorded and will be put out from GDIT, discussing some more details on building up a program as well. So keep an eye out for that.
Absolutely, and I'm sure that'll be incredibly informative. So I highly recommend everyone take a look at that as well once it comes out. And next month, in addition to being National Insider Threat Awareness Month, is also Suicide Awareness Month. And so keep an eye out for an invitation for another session we'll be doing here at Everfox regarding insider threat programs and employee wellness and kind of how to help with that. So again, thanks so much, everybody, for joining. If you have any questions, absolutely drop it in chat. We'll keep an eye on that, or reach out to me or John. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Great chatting, Clay.
Yeah, good talking to you, John.